As the pale yellow glow of streetlights spilled onto the old brick walls, a story waited quietly to be told. It is the journey of a woman where the cold wind didn't just sweep through her hair, but also carried away the last illusions of a family she once thought loved her. Amid meals filled with scrutinizing glances and sweet words that masked deceit, she learned to look deeply into her own eyes and realized that true strength doesn't come from those who promise to love you forever, but from a heart that dares to walk alone, whether it faces the dark night or the breaking dawn. Let this story, with every beat of hope and every scar of betrayal, remind you that sometimes the most valuable thing isn't the gatherings that bring people together, but the freedom you find in your own breath. This is not just the story of Amelia Brooks. This is the story of anyone who has ever stood at the threshold of kinship and realized that family isn't always where you belong. In the brilliant yellow light of a chilly Chicago morning, Amelia Brooks leaned against the large window frame of her rented apartment, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, quietly watching the city begin to stir. At 26, she was not only a promising investment management professional at Anderson and Grant, a leading financial firm in the region, but also a living testament to the story of someone who had walked her own path to success. The simple gray walls of the apartment seemed to accentuate the quiet elegance of a woman whose resolute yet gentle gaze radiated the poise of someone who had poured her heart into a dream without complaint or hesitation. Amelia was not born into wealth, nor did she have the glamorous scaffolding of family support, but she possessed something more important, a fierce belief in her own worth. With hands that never shied away from hard work and a will forged in steel, she had saved every penny from her first bonuses, carefully setting aside each month's salary, so that one day she would step into an apartment that bore her name, unburdened by debt, pity, or dependence. Each morning, before stepping into the bustling rhythm of the financial district, Amelia took a few minutes to let her thoughts drift across the awakening city. The passing buses, the birds swooping down by the shores of Lake Michigan, all served as a testament to the ceaseless motion of life, and she knew she too was constantly moving forward. It was a small habit, but a meaningful one, a quiet reminder that behind every hurried step was a heart that never stopped beating for its dreams. But then an unexpected phone call from Aunt Nora, the aunt she loved and respected more than anyone, sent a cold gust through the picture she had been carefully crafting. "Amelia, will you be coming home for Thanksgiving?" Her aunt's warm voice carried a note of hesitation, as if testing the waters with a niece who hadn't returned to the old family house for years. A simple question, yet it made Amelia's heart skip a beat. In that moment, memories from 8 years ago rose like unbidden fragments. The image of a young girl trembling as she clutched her college acceptance letter, tears still clinging to her lashes. The image of her parents coldly refusing to help because all they had was for Vivian's wedding, her older sister's wedding. In that moment, Amelia knew exactly where she stood in her family, forever a second choice. She had packed all her hopes into a small suitcase and turned to Aunt Nora, the only person who had ever held her close, dried her tears, and whispered, "Never forget, there's someone who always believed you could do it." Now, hearing that familiar voice break through the long beeps of a call, Amelia saw that young girl again, eyes still bright, but no longer hoping for miracles from a family that only knew duty and never love. Amelia knew Aunt Nora's call wasn't just about a holiday dinner. Her aunt called because she had always been watching over her, always wanting to see a true smile on the face of a niece who had endured so much. And Amelia, despite the life she had built on her own, couldn't help but feel a pang in her chest. Maybe deep down she still yearned for a miracle, that someone there would truly see her worth, not with hollow words, but with genuine eyes and open arms. And then, as if she were nodding to her own heart, Amelia spoke softly but firmly, "Yes, I'll come home." In that moment, she knew that perhaps a new chapter was waiting for her, one that, though it might be full of challenges, she was ready to face, because she understood she was no longer the timid girl of 8 years ago. Amelia Brooks today was a woman who knew her own worth, and no one could take that away from her. On the early train departing Chicago for her family's countryside home, Amelia Brooks sat quietly by the window, her eyes thoughtful as drab gray fields rushed past. Winter's breath seemed to seep into every crack, though it could not dispel the chill smoldering within her chest. 8 years ago, on that very same train, she had boarded with a broken heart and a small suitcase full of remaining hope, leaving behind a home that had once been her sanctuary, but had become the grave of her dreams and trust. The memory of that night remained vivid, the university acceptance letter she cradled like treasure, her radiant face, as she crossed the threshold of her childhood home to share the good news with her parents, only to be met with cold glances and words that froze her blood. Vivian is getting married. You should understand her wedding is more important than that paperwork, her mother had said, her voice as hollow as an empty cup on the dinner table. Her father, the man who had once held her in his arms on stormy nights, looked away from his daughter clutching the newspaper, as if only the world's headlines deserved his attention. Amelia had not spoken another word. She didn't cry. She silently climbed the stairs, gathering her books and the few clothes she needed. In the hush of the home once filled with laughter, she heard her heart beating erratically and questions echoing. Why not me? Why am I never chosen? Yet amid unanswered questions, a decision took shape. She would no longer cling to love from those who had dismissed her. Pausing at the door, she glanced back once to see her parents still seated, as though her departure had been no more than a passing breeze. She resolved one day they will see me as I deserve to see me, not someone else's shadow, not the forgotten name in their story. Firmly gripping her suitcase handle, she walked away without looking back. And as if by quiet miracle, amid loss, Aunt Nora had opened her home and embraced Amelia, her husky voice shaped by life's pain, whispering, "You may not have everything, but you will always have this place. This place will never close its doors to you." In the days that followed, Amelia juggled work and studies, rebuilding herself from the ashes of a youth betrayed. Aunt Nora became a small, warm light guiding her path, reminding her that someone still believed in her true worth. Now on this return journey, Amelia felt her heart no longer fragile. She was not going home to beg for acceptance or to find love from those who had denied it. She was returning for Aunt Nora's invitation out of gratitude for the person who trusted her when the world turned away. Yet deep in her heart, Amelia did not deny that she still yearned for even a fleeting moment to see her parents look at her with pride. The train pressed forward, carrying the young woman whose wounds had ceased bleeding yet, whose hope had never faded. Amelia knew this return was not an ending, but the opening of a new chapter, a chapter in which she would confront her family, herself, and the truths that had been buried for 8 long years. Amelia Brooks stepped onto the worn steps of Aunt Nora's house, taking a deep breath to steady the lingering tremors in her chest. In the soft glow of the reddish twilight at the quiet corner of the street, she saw Aunt Nora waiting on the porch, a steaming cup of tea in her hand, her eyes glowing with gentle joy. No words were needed. In that first look, Amelia knew that here, though simple, though lacking the grandeur of Chicago's towering buildings, was her true home. Aunt Nora wasn't her mother, nor was she obligated to care for Amelia, yet she had opened her arms to her since the day Amelia had been abandoned by her own blood family. In the days and months after that fateful night, Amelia had clung to every word of comfort, every caring gesture from her aunt, slowly reclaiming the belief that she was worthy of love, worthy of trust. Back then, Aunt Nora had not just given Amelia a roof over her head, but had also placed in her hands the savings of many years' money that was meant for the only son she had lost in a sudden accident. When she handed over that sum, Aunt Nora merely smiled as though it was nothing, as though helping a child find herself was simply what a heart accustomed to wounds would do. "You owe me nothing, dear," she had said. "Just promise me you'll live fully, never letting anyone else decide your worth." And Amelia had promised a vow unspoken, but carved into every heartbeat, every breath. She threw herself into her studies and worked tirelessly from late nights brewing coffee to early mornings returning home with aching hands and eyes red from relentless studying. Every penny she saved, every paycheck she folded and tucked into a small envelope, was a quiet tribute to Aunt Nora, the woman who had saved her when the world seemed intent on burying her. 2 years later, when Amelia received her official contract at Anderson and Grant, the first thing she did wasn't to buy an expensive dress or a fancy watch. She returned to Aunt Nora's house, placing into her aunt's hands the first sum of money that would clear that debt of gratitude and, more importantly, to prove to the world that she had risen on her own 2 feet. Aunt Nora merely smiled, her eyes glistening but her gaze steady, as if she had always known Amelia would never let her down. "I don't need your money, sweetheart," she said. "I just need to know you've found yourself." But Amelia still pressed that money into her hand, an unwavering testament to the promise she had kept. On this misty afternoon, as Amelia returned to the place that had saved her every step she took, was a reminder of the path paved with long nights and tears, but also with glimmers of light and hope. She knew that today's success wasn't about the prestige or the wealth that Anderson and Grant might bring, but about proving to herself and to those who had once denied her that no one could take away a person's worth if they still believed in themselves. Standing before Aunt Nora, Amelia offered a serene smile no longer marked by trembling or doubt. She had become her own person, not a shadow in someone else's story, but a fresh page waiting to be written by her own steady, proud hand. Amelia carefully placed the pumpkin pie she had prepared on the oak dining table in Aunt Nora's living room, unaware that the warmth of this Thanksgiving evening was about to be suffocated by an unexpected reunion for which she had never prepared herself. The sweet aromas of cinnamon and pumpkin blended with the scent of the fireplace, creating a peaceful ambiance, but when the back door quietly opened and familiar footsteps echoed, Amelia's heart suddenly tightened. It wasn't the sound of neighborhood children or rustling leaves, but the footsteps of memories, those of people who had inflicted hidden wounds on her for the past 8 years. When she turned around, she saw her parents standing there, accompanied by Vivian and her 2 young children clinging behind their mother. In that moment, Amelia heard her blood pounding, each vein screaming, "Why are they here? Why today?" Aunt Nora hurried to Amelia's side, her aged hand gripping her arm in a small touch filled with remorse and regret. "They didn't warn me," she murmured, her voice hoarse with worry. "I didn't know they'd come, Amelia." But now, any explanation felt like thin smoke, incapable of filling the emptiness spreading in Amelia's chest. She scanned the cozy living room still adorned with Aunt Nora's family photos and wondered whether this was still her true home or merely a temporary refuge, while her biological family remained a wound not yet healed. Her mother looked older than Amelia remembered. Her hair was graying, her gaze fragile like morning mist on a lake. Her father remained silent, bowing his head, when their eyes met a gesture so unfamiliar it weighed on Amelia's heart, not from pity, but from a distance too profound to bridge. Vivian stood nearby, gently patting her son's back, as if everything were fine, as if the presence of her once-forgotten sister was no cause for concern. And Amelia understood in their eyes she was either a stranger or worse, a memory best left unspoken. She slowly turned away, seeking a breath of fresh air by the slightly open window. Laughter and chatter floated in from children playing outside, starkly contrasting the heavy atmosphere inside. Aunt Nora tried to fill the void with small talk about the garden's new rosemary plants, about the repaired oven after several windy winters, but her words felt like a thin coat of paint over old cracks. Dinner began in silence, The clink of cutlery on plates sounded like warnings of something about to break. Amelia sat in the corner pushing pieces of chicken around her plate without intent to eat. Her eyes searched the faces around the table, longing for a spark of warmth, a genuine look, a heartfelt smile, but all she found were evasive glances or quick dips of the head. Vivian spoke of her husband's successes, their travel adventures, and the prestigious school she hoped for her children. Her parents nodded occasionally, glancing at Amelia as if waiting for congratulations, but Amelia pressed her lips together in quiet stillness. She knew she no longer belonged in that world, that her place was no longer in the family stories she had once longed to be part of. And amid those stock phrases, Amelia heard her heart whisper, "I am no longer the child seeking their love. I am strong enough not to crave the acceptance of those who rejected me." In that brightly lit, cozy room, she realized something: a true home isn't one filled with loud laughter, but one where you don't have to fight to exist. Aunt Nora was that true home. No grand words, no empty promises, only genuine, unwavering love, like a warm flame in a winter night. Amelia inhaled deeply, lifted her chin, and met the moment with a gaze more composed and proud than ever. She had returned not to seek affection, but to prove that she had lived, had risen above, and was no longer the easily abandoned girl she once was. As the golden streetlights cast flickering streaks across Aunt Nora's back porch, Amelia leaned against the time-worn wooden railing, her hand trembling slightly in the cool night air as she listened to her mother's words behind her, each echoing like remnants of a past that never truly closed. "Amelia, we were wrong." Her mother's voice faltered, caught between shame and a fragility Amelia no longer knew whether to believe. The scent of damp wood and dried pine needles around the yard seemed to evoke memories of the young girl who once ran joyfully here, believing that if she was obedient and tried hard enough, love would come. But now, hearing her mother's quivering voice, Amelia felt as though she stood before a stranger, someone who once held her hand as she walked through her first door, yet released it at the most crucial moment. Her mother's eyes, when they met Amelia's, appeared filled with 100 regrets. But Amelia was no longer the naive child who would trust tears. "Your father, Vivian, and I, we judged you wrongly." Her mother's side hands clasped, as though trying to hide her insecurity. Amelia remained silent, her gaze drifting toward the distance where the maple trees were beginning to shed their leaves, each golden leaf drifting down like a sigh of autumn. "It took us years to recognize our mistake, Amelia. Your father, he couldn't bring himself to meet your eyes out of embarrassment, and I have blamed myself countless times." Her voice choked, mingling with the wind rustling through the wooden fence. Each word struck at the old scars that had long since closed, no longer bleeding yet still aching with silent pain. She didn't turn around. She merely nodded slightly, acknowledging that she was listening, even though her heart remained shielded by layers of past wounds. "Do you know," her mother continued, "over these years, every time I thought of you, I wondered, are you happy? Have you found peace? Or are you still harboring resentment from back then?" Amelia closed her eyes and took a steady breath. She knew her mother might never fully understand the long nights she spent studying and working, counting every penny and mapping calluses on her hands. Yet she also sensed that in her mother's question lingered a trace of love, though faint and belated. "I need time." Amelia finally spoke quietly, her tone calm yet resolute, built on the strength she had painstakingly rebuilt over 8 years. "Things can't be changed just with an apology, Mom. I am no longer a child who simply obeys and hopes. I have learned to stand strong on my own, and I am proud of that." Her mother fell silent, as if those words closed the door on any expectation of easy forgiveness. In the gentle darkness of that Thanksgiving evening, Amelia more clearly than ever felt the distance between herself and the woman who once was everything to her, a distance no longer bridged by shared meals or belated gifts. Yet within that silence she felt a flicker of relief. Finally, she had spoken the truth. Her heart had longed to say that she still could love, but would no longer leave space for old wounds. Outside on the porch, Aunt Nora quietly placed a hand on Amelia's shoulder, her gaze gentle yet strong. "You don't have to forgive today," she whispered. "But at least forgive yourself for having believed, having loved, and being strong enough to move forward." In that moment, Amelia realized that though her path behind was bramble-strewn before her, lay a road opening wide, the road of a woman who had learned that true worth lies not in others' acceptance, but in a heart that never stopped hoping and continuing forward. 2 weeks after that heartbreaking Thanksgiving evening, Amelia still couldn't shake the feeling of instability that crept in nightly. Her mother's words, the tear-brimmed eyes, and her promise to change reverberated within her chest like persistent waves, sometimes crashing, sometimes whispering, but never silent. She asked herself hundreds of times, should she trust? Should she open a door that had long been sealed shut? Many nights found Amelia sitting motionless in her small apartment, staring at the tall buildings beyond their golden lights, a stark contrast to the icy chill inside her heart. She recalled the mornings with Aunt Nora, who quietly listened to her, never offering unsolicited advice, simply allowing Amelia to know there was always a place ready to welcome her back, whether she chose forgiveness or rejection. One evening, streetlights cast rippling reflections on her windowpane as Amelia stared at her mother's name on her phone screen. Her finger trembled not from fear, but from recognizing that this call might open a new path. After several hesitant beats, she pressed call. Her mother answered on the third ring, voice soft, woven with nervous anticipation. "Mom," Amelia said, her voice testing her own resolve. "I've been thinking about what you said, and I think maybe we should try." Those words slipped out not easily, but also far less heavy than she'd imagined. They were more like a whispered vow to her own heart. "I'm ready to try this time, steering my own course." A week later, Amelia returned to her childhood home. It looked the same, save for cracks on the old yellow walls like scars left by time. She entered taking a deep breath, her steps deliberate as though feeling each brick of her memories. Her mother stood at the kitchen threshold, hurriedly wiping her apron, expression a mix of awkwardness and relief. There were no grand apologies or tearful displays. Instead, a silence of acceptance and shared glances enough for Amelia to know that although this wasn't a perfect reunion, it was at least a beginning. She handed her mother a beige wool scarf she used to love, a classic novel her father had once mentioned wanting to read, and small gifts for her nieces and nephews, not expensive, but wrapped with all her heart. Over that dinner, no one offered sugar-coated words or painted a flawless picture. Her mother spoke of sleepless nights and nameless regrets. Her father remained silent, eyes searching his daughter's face for a piece of her past. Amelia made no promises, offered no blame. She simply listened, letting the words wash over her like a seasonal rain, cleansing away layers of anger and doubt. When the meal ended, Amelia realized that even if she hadn't fully forgiven, she'd at least reclaimed her voice in this home, a calm voice, no longer fragile. As she climbed the stairs afterward, her hand gliding over the worn wooden railing, Amelia knew that her journey to reclaim her place in her family had truly begun slowly, maybe painfully, but this time she would never lose her way. Amelia thought that warm family dinners, the soft laughter of the children, and trivial conversations in the living room might serve as a bridge to bring everyone closer together. But after only a few weeks, she began to sense something different, like a strange flavor seeping through every doorway and smile. Her mother's words of thanks sometimes sounded like a habit, and Vivian's gaze always sparkled as if holding something Amelia couldn't reach. At the dinner table with the old wooden top, Vivian chattered on about her unstable job, the small debts for her 2 children, and then, with a skillful ease, she dropped complaints like pebbles on the tabletop. "I just wish someone could help. Just a little for the sake of the kids." Each time her mother's eyes flicked toward Amelia like an unspoken command. And Amelia, with an unstoppable compassion, quietly helped a small sum for the failing heater, a gift for the grandchildren's birthday, or secretly paying a tuition bill after Vivian said there was no other way. Aunt Nora was the first to notice the fragile cracks appearing in Amelia's spirit. One afternoon, while they sat side by side on the wooden bench under the porch, Aunt Nora placed her hand on Amelia's and spoke softly but firmly. "You've done enough, Amelia. More than they deserve." Amelia simply smiled the smile of someone used to being strong because deep down she still believed that family was worth preserving and worth her patience. Then one morning Aunt Nora returned from the nearby bakery and said quietly but with certainty, "Amelia, I heard this from one of your mother's old friends. They say your mother and Vivian joke that you're nothing more than the family ATM, that with a little bit of skill you'll pay for everything." Amelia froze. Each word her aunt spoke became a tiny pin, piercing the pride she had painstakingly built over 8 years. In that moment, everything became clear. The hugs, the promises, the laughter-filled dinners, all were glamorous masks hiding a harsh truth. All the love she had nurtured, all the money she had sent without hesitation, it was nothing but a joke, a source of amusement for people who once cast her aside without a glance back. In that instant, Amelia did not cry, rage, or reproach. She only stood there, her eyes gently closing her heart, a calm sea beneath whose surface surged silent strength. A person who had learned to rise from ruin was now composed enough to realize that not every bond of kinship is worth saving, and sometimes the most noble act is not forgiveness, but the courage to let go. Bathed in the sunset's crimson glow, Amelia knew that this time she would never again allow anyone to carve wounds into her heart. The next morning, Amelia woke up with dry eyes, no tears left. Only a new determination etched across her face as she looked at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Everything was painfully clear now, and Amelia knew she needed to write the final chapter in this endless family drama. She carefully folded a few changes of clothes and tucked them into her old suitcase, each small, pretty item a witness to a chapter of her life that was now over. Neat, not heavy, free of any burdens. There was no more room in her heart for bitterness or grief, only a calm resolve like the glassy surface of a lake after a midnight storm. She walked down to the living room and saw her mother sitting at the dining table, her fingers tapping lightly on the wood as if she was waiting for something. Her mother's eyes met Amelia's, filled with confusion, but also a flicker of expectation. "Are you planning to go somewhere?" her mother asked, her voice trembling in a way that made no attempt to hide it. Amelia simply nodded, her hand gripping the handle of her suitcase. "I need some space to breathe," she said, her voice stripped of accusation or resentment, only the truth spoken plainly. But more shocking than her own calm was the next question from her mother, or more accurately, the blunt challenge that nearly stopped Amelia in her tracks. "And what about the money you've been sending every month? Are you going to stop?" The question landed like a cold blade, slicing through every illusion that might have been left. Amelia looked straight into her mother's eyes and saw the worry there, a worry not for her but for themselves, for their debts, for the expectations they had grown used to her shouldering. A quiet laugh slipped from Amelia's lips, not loud but enough to startle her mother. "Mother," she said, her voice steady and measured like a final declaration, "I understand now. I'm not a bank. Not a well you can draw from without ever giving back. And I'm no longer a child who believes that being dutiful is enough to be loved." Her mother fell silent, her lips trembling, while Vivian's gaze from behind the doorframe turned sharp and cold, like someone who had just been stripped of their sweet disguise. "If there's no money," Vivian said, her voice bitter like honey, turned to vinegar after being hidden for too long, "then what worth do you have left to this family?" Amelia didn't answer. She stepped over to her suitcase, pulling it gently, as if leading herself out of the tight walls that had caged her heart for far too long. With her hand on the doorknob, she turned back for one final look. No more fear, no more longing to be accepted. She only said softly, "I wish you and Vivian find happiness in your own way." Then Amelia stepped outside the wheels of her suitcase, rattling across the floor like a drumbeat, sending off a chapter that was long dead. The morning light flooded the walkway, casting a bright halo over her shoulders, the glow of a freedom no one could ever buy. In that moment, Amelia knew that this time she wasn't just leaving a house. She was shedding a chain that had bound her heart for too long. And with each step away from that old home, she felt herself grow lighter, as if she were soaring up with the first rays of a completely new day. When Amelia stepped into her new apartment, the whitewashed walls and the windows welcoming the early morning light seemed to open their arms to a completely different beginning. In that quiet space, she stood still, eyes closed, taking a deep breath to let the air of freedom seep into every lung, every cell. Gone were the whispers of mocking voices, the judging stares, or the insidious comments that once forced her into silence. There was only Amelia, a woman who had weathered the storms of family and hollow promises, and still stood tall like a tree that had learned to reach for the sun on its own. Aunt Nora stopped by that afternoon, bringing with her a fragrant baked pie and a gentle smile. They sat by the large window where the rays of sunlight stretched across the wooden table and shared a bit of ruby-hued wine. Amelia told her aunt about the first time she saw this apartment, a small room, but enough for her to make every choice for herself. A breezy balcony where she could watch the city's lights come alive and remind herself that freedom was never given but won. Aunt Nora asked little, simply listened, her hand gently squeezing Amelia's, as if to say she was proud of her more than anything else. As night fell, the city outside still shimmered like the steady beat of life's veins. Amelia sat alone in her new armchair, watching the streets below sparkle in the dark. She picked up her phone and scrolled through old photos, and Amelia confused her eyes, still wet with disappointment, and Amelia burdened by invisible debts she had never been thanked for. Then she swiped all those pictures away, leaving only a single moment, her standing on this balcony, her hair lifted by the night wind, her gaze fierce like a vow to never again let anyone strip away her worth. Her phone rang unexpectedly, her mother's name lighting up the screen. Amelia didn't rush to answer. She set it down on the table, letting the ringing play out like an old song that no longer softened her resolve. She knew they would try to cling to her again through honeyed words or belated tears. But now, Amelia was no longer the girl who cowered trembling at every demand of her family. Now she was a woman who understood that family ties could not be measured in monthly transfers or endless sacrifices. Family, if it existed, was only worth cherishing when it came from a place of genuine care and mutual respect. Amelia rose and stepped onto the balcony, her gaze sweeping across the horizon, a galaxy of city lights in miniature. The night wind touched her skin, cool and gentle like a silent celebration. She knew the days ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be lonely nights, long hours with only her breath and quiet questions. But Amelia also knew that every step she took now was stronger than any she had ever made, because they no longer wavered on anyone else's expectations. For the first time in many years, Amelia felt truly whole, not because she had everything, but because she had found herself again. And she knew that was the home no one could ever push her out of. In the radiant glow of a city awakening at night, Amelia Brooks stood on the balcony of her apartment, one hand resting on the railing, the other clutching a warm ceramic mug. She knew the journey to reclaim her freedom and her dignity had never been easy, but each step and every resolute decision were proof of her strength, the strength of a heart that dared to love, to trust, and to let go when necessary. The last rays of the day spilled into her hair like a quiet toast to a woman who had dared to close the door on the past and write a new story for herself. And if Amelia's story has resonated with a part of you, leave a quiet mark in the comments, share your thoughts, and don't forget to follow, so we can keep finding and nurturing journeys of courage and freedom together. I'll see you in the next story, where light and shadow will once again weave together and will continue to search for our own paths.